about this with Avi Hyman, as I say, spokesman for the Israeli government. Avi, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Well, the news came out yesterday that the chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court was seeking arrest warrants, not just for Benjamin Netanyahu, also your defence minister, but alongside Hamas leaders, including the leader of Hamas in Gaza, that's Yahya Sinwar, again, man believed to be hiding out in the tunnels of Rafah, surrounded by Israeli hostages seized on October the 7th. Do you, first of all, do you think it's reasonable, leaving aside what Joe Biden has had to say, reasonable and appropriate that the International Criminal Court should look at not just terrorists and their actions, but also the actions of governments? We've also seen an arrest warrant last year for Vladimir Putin over the mass deportation of children and adults from Ukraine to Russian territories. Do you think it's at least within the reasonable realms of the court's jurisdiction for them to look at arrest warrants for a leader like Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think that the International Criminal Court has crossed a red line. This is an absolute farce. The notion that you can go after a democratic state with free, independent judiciary that army complies with international humanitarian law, with the laws of armed conflicts, 100%. That you can go after them in some kind of a PR ploy, in some kind of a plot against the Jews. That's what we see. Like my Prime Minister said, Mr. Khan puts himself alongside some of the greatest anti-Semites in history. This is a witch hunt against the Jews. And he puts himself in the same place as the infamous Nazi judges that donned their robes, made laws against Jews, taking away the rights, all rights from Jews, and ending up in the worst tragedy in history, the Holocaust. Hamas is seeking a second Holocaust, and the ICC seem to be adding fuel to their fire.
Well, very strong words from you there. You've heard to Mr. Khan. This is Karim Khan, and he's the chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court. He says, look, he has seen, taken advice from international lawyers, international judges, a panel of people, including apparently Amal Clooney, human rights lawyer, his wife, of course, of George Clooney. That's why most of us have heard of her. And that this is an issue. Now, look, I think it's outrageous. I agree with Joe Biden. I think it's absolutely outrageous to ascribe any moral equivalence in any way to issue arrest warrants for democratically elected members of a democratic nation to members of a government alongside Hamas terrorists, prescribed terrorist organisation. I think that is an outrage to pretend in some way these are the same actions or the same responsibility. But just because a Prime Minister or a Defence Minister or anyone else is democratically elected in an allied nation, they can still commit war crimes, can they not? I mean, America could commit war crimes, Britain could commit war crimes, any country could commit war crimes. We have to allow for that. Is it the fact that it's been at this time and it was within the same document with Hamas? Or are you saying that because Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defence Minister are part of a democratically elected coalition government, they should not face any oversight from the International Criminal Court?
Firstly, the court has no jurisdiction on us. This is a purely political decision, and it will fail. They have no jurisdiction over Israel. Israel's not party to the ICC. America's not party to the ICC. But let's look at the substance. Israel has not broken international law. The British government has been clear about that. The Americans have been clear about that. And obviously, like the president said, there's no genocide. In reality, Israel, on the total flip side, in a different universe almost from what Khan is saying, Israel is actually flooding Gaza with humanitarian aid. There is no issue with humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Israel has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, civilian to combatant ratio in the history of modern warfare, meaning we are doing our absolute utmost. We're doing more than any other army in history has done to avoid civilian casualties. All of the allegations against us are fully baseless, fully political, because the ICC has very little legitimacy in the world. It has done very little in the 20 years that it's existed. And now they're pointing at Israel as a way to, impress their donors and make headlines. Well, it won't work. Like my Prime Minister made it very, very clear, we will continue on with our war. We will destroy Hamas, we will bring home the hostages, and we will ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to us. Whether this international body or other international bodies speak out against us, try and take action against us, We owe that to the children of Israel and to the children of Gaza to ensure that there's a peaceful, better future for everyone in the region.
I mean, there's no doubt at all that we've seen what's happened at United Nations and seeing what's happened in the International Criminal Court. The way that Israel is being held to account, and much higher account would appear than a terrorist organisation in Hamas, but held to a much higher account than pretty much any other nation waging war. We have a lot of lip service being paid to, yes, Israel has a right to self-defence. But when Israel defends itself, then they don't have the right, or they have the right to defend themselves in the way that, say, America could defend themselves against, after 9/11. But only for a few months, only to a certain death toll. And by the way, we have seen that. I'll come on to that. The UN death toll for women and children being revised downwards very considerably in recent weeks. But why do you think Israel is held to a higher threshold by pretty much every international organisation that is supposed to be neutral politically, internationally, and yet Israel again and again is held to a threshold which no other country is held to?
It's the age-old question of one of the world's oldest hates: anti-Semitism, Jew hatred. I can't think of any other reason. Again, it's not that we're just going out of our way to avoid civilian casualties. It's that we're doing better than any other army in history. It's not just that there isn't famine in Gaza. It's that we're flooding Gaza with humanitarian aid in a way, again, that I'm pretty sure you'll find it hard to find any other army that has done what we've done to preserve civilian life on both sides of the conflict. But somehow, the finger points to the Jews. Jews are news, and it's a disgrace. We see straight through it, and it won't stop us to continue prosecuting this war in the way that we are, which is in full in line with international humanitarian law. Okay,
I mean, look. Let's come back to the death toll we're seeing, because we're told that every death is a terrible thing. We all agree. Every child who dies in war is it's one too many. But we also do know that civilians do die in wars, and they've done so since time immemorial, and will continue to do so at all times. And it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. However, it does happen. But we've seen the figures that have been coming out about the death toll. We're told 70% of deaths are women and children. Now, given that children make up more than half the population, and women obviously be half the population, actually you don't have to go very far to see why that would actually be a likely statistic anyway, and especially as a lot of the men are fighters and they're hiding in the Hamas tunnels, when the women and children are not. But we've recently seen the UN revising down by about half, actually, the figures they'd been accepting from the Hamas-run Health Ministry about the number of women and children who have been killed in this war. To date, pretty much every media organisation has said, no, there's no reason to question these figures. And yet, when you look at the Iraq war, we didn't have it. We still don't know to this day how many people died in particular parts of the war. I mean, some people still spout over 1 million. No, that's definitely wrong. Was it 100,000? Was it 600,000? And yet, supposedly, day after day, we're expecting that Hamas, amid all the rubble, amid all the chaos, amid all the people moving from one end of Gaza to the other end of Gaza and moving day by day, they were supposed to be able to give us an exact tally of the number of innocent civilians who had died. What do you make of the decision by the UN to finally accept that actually those Hamas health figures, Hamas department figures, were not actually that accurate?
So there's a problem here, like you say, with the UN, international organizations. There's a problem with the media, but it also comes back to the ICC, which is basing their action against us on these fake and fabricated numbers. We've said from day one that they're fake and fabricated. So now the latest news is that the United Nations has come out and said that half of the women and children were not actually women and children in their figures. Well, we'll go one further. We'll say that the numbers they have are false and fake. They come from Hamas. We have put out estimates ourselves. We've said that we've killed over 14,000 terrorists. And sadly, because those terrorists insulate themselves with civilians and hostages, sadly, they use human shields in a sick way. Sadly, it would appear that about 16,000 civilians have lost their lives as because of the war that Hamas has started. So when you take that number of around 16,000, and it's virtually impossible to know during a war exactly how many people have been killed in that way, because obviously it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
We take that 16,000 and you put it next to the 40-odd thousand that's often spouted in protests and whatnot across London and elsewhere. It's absurd. And this is what the ICC is doing. They are taking false and fake numbers and they're holding us to account on lies.
Isn't one of the issues here that actually Hamas are fighting a much better propaganda war than you are? And I see it with the bots that attack me from my stance on this issue. And again, as you'll know, and your colleagues, I don't defend everything that's happened in the war. There's various things I'd be very critical of that Israel has done, either in the war or actually in settlements and the like. But that doesn't mean I would not defend your right to self-defence, and that self-defence would require you to go into Gaza. And yes, unfortunately, civilians being used as human shields will end up dying in those circumstances. Where does this end, though? Because lots of people are talking about what happens. What is the day after? What happens then? How does this end? If we've got people in Gaza who have been displaced again and again and again, we've got a situation where you've got, we've been warnings of famine for some months now. We haven't seen that come about, have we? But people not being able to get hold of enough food. Now, whether that's because of aid trucks not being allowed in, or whether it's a problem with the Hamas stealing the aid, I'm not on the ground, I can't tell. But we do have a situation where we have a humanitarian crisis, do we not?
Listen, don't be fooled by my accent. I'm the son of a refugee. I understand what it means to have to move from place to place because of war and conflicts. And it's an awful, awful thing. It would never have happened had Hamas not plowed through our borders, killing children in front of their parents, parents in front of their children, raping young girls in front of their parents, and then burning whole families alive. Hamas started this war. We will end this war. We will end this war with victory. Now, what does that look like? We will destroy Hamas, we'll bring home the hostages, and we'll ensure that Gaza doesn't pose a threat to us. Now, when people talk about the day after, it's the day after Hamas. And it can only be realized the day after Hamas. And we've sadly learned that the hard way. And this has been widely reported, we empowered various people on the ground to try and distribute aid in a better way than the organizations that were failing drastically in a way that would avoid Hamas. We tried to empower some of the local Palestinian people in Gaza, and they were shot in the head by Hamas. As long as Hamas is in control in Gaza, it's not even worth discussing the day after Hamas. So we have to continue with that. And after we've destroyed Hamas, we need to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. We need to de-radicalize the Gaza Strip so that they're not teaching their children from day zero to hate and want to kill Jews. They're not teaching their children that one day they will be able to flatten Tel Aviv and take over. That's not going to happen. So we have very clear war aims. We hope to achieve those aims as soon as possible. And to the naysayers that said, how dare you go into Rafah? How dare you go into Rafah and take out the last 4 Hamas battalions and win this war? I say this. You said that we couldn't get the civilians out of harm's way. Well, in the last few days, we've managed to take close to 1 million civilians out of harm's way in Rafah. They have plenty of humanitarian aid, shelter, medical equipment, field hospitals to take care of them. And we're going after Hamas. And to date, we've found about 50 tunnels that Hamas was using to import and export into Gaza from Egypt. We found 700 tunnel shafts. We basically turned off the tap for Hamas in Rafah, and we will continue to total victory.
Okay, we appreciate you joining us.